Hello and welcome to another episode. I like to call this one the bourbon session. This is where I talk to Elisabeth, who likes to talk about things like happiness starting with a breath, making ugly smoothies, curvy yoga, out-of-body experiences, and so on and so forth. So, without further ado, let's go.
Thank you for doing this.
Of course. I love to talk.
I'm super psyched. Well, and then when you were like, let's talk and let's have drinks, I'm like, okay. I was talking to somebody earlier today about, feeling your connection with the universe, and I was talking about drinking, and I was like,
It's clearly meant to be.
It is, exactly. So what are some of your practices? I met you through yoga, but like why yoga?
That's a really good question, because if you would have told me 10 years ago that this is where I would be and what I would be doing, I would have said absolutely not. Because I was the most unlikely yogi in the planet. Super type A, ran at a crazy fast pace, just mentally, emotionally in my life, not yogic at all. And then in my body, I was curvy and I had things in places other people who practice yoga didn't, and I was super inflexible, and I still am actually relatively inflexible. And I couldn't ever see myself practicing yoga. I would always rather sit on the couch and read a book than move my body. And then my next door neighbor, Julie, invited me to go to a yoga class, and she invited me to go to happy hour.
Even better.
Even better. She invited me to go to happy hour and have sweet potato fries and beer, and then said, but let's go to yoga first. And I said, why the hell would we do that? Why wouldn't we just go eat and drink? And she said, give it a try. And so I did, and it was a horrible experience. It was 90 minutes, non-beginner, Sanskrit, all sorts of things that my body couldn't at that point even fathom doing, and I had a very frustrating experience. But when I laid down in Shavasana, I experienced something that I had never experienced before. And I don't know how common that is in your first practice, but it drew me back and really informed how I practice and teach now. And so my personal practice is almost non-existent because I teach about 25 classes a week. And so it doesn't give a lot of time.
How do you teach so many classes?
I teach at a fitness center, so I do teach back to back. So I get to go to one location and I teach. So on Thursday, I teach a class at 7, at 8, at 9, at 10, and at 11. So I teach 5 hours back to back. And that's one way that you can get big chunks of teaching in. And then I teach at Yes Yoga, obviously, but only 3 classes a week. And I teach to private students and in group homes. And so I sort of juggle my time about 12 to 15 classes a week at the fitness center, and then 12 to 13 or 14 classes a week elsewhere.
So how do you approach doing so many classes? Because I mean, I've just started teaching. I teach once a week, and it's like in the beginning, I was overwhelmed thinking about like next week's one class.
Yeah.
You know?
And I totally was. I started out teaching 1 class a week. The first class I taught was at Yes. It was absolutely terrible. I overthought it. I couldn't stick to a script, and I went away from teaching at Yes and then came back to it. But for the longest time, I taught 1 class a week, and then I got up to like 3 or 4 or 5 classes a week, and then I had to make a decision about what I wanted to do for my next phase of life, whether or not I wanted to do nonprofit fundraising consulting or catering, or if I wanted to teach yoga, because doing all 3 wasn't really sustainable. And so I started to do math and figure out what do I need to do to make a sustainable living just teaching yoga.
Yeah.
Because I really feel like it's my life's calling and it's my life's work. And
That's so cool.
I started adding classes, but really quickly I dropped the planning classes and I teach intuitively. So when people walk in, just today, I had 3 students who were new to me, and they said, what props do we need today? And I said, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know from the beginning of class how class is going to end.
Yeah.
So
I like that though.
If I were planning classes, either I would teach the same class all week long, or I would never sleep because I would have to be constantly But the reality is, as a teacher, we're guiding students to help them find what they need. And so if I come in and say, this is what you're doing today, I'm not giving them that space. And I'm not allowing myself to really intuit what it is that people need in the moment and in their practice.
Right.
I mean, most of us don't even necessarily know. So for somebody else to assume that they know by coming up with a sequence or a plan, you know.
Yeah, I found it to be, I mean, and that's how I've been trying to teach too in the beginning. Is I'm just like, I can't go off a script. I just have a general idea of, you know, warming up and sun A, sun B, and moving through. But I'm just kind of feeling the temperature of the class, the people, the environment where we are, the day it seems that we're having, and then I also like how I'm feeling, and I just kind of, and going to classes regularly, then things just come to me. I'll be in Warrior 2 and I'll be like, oh, you know. So
Right, the next place to land will just show up.
It'll just show up.
Yeah.
It's remembering that left and right shit that just drives me crazy.
Do you demonstrate?
Yeah.
Okay, and so do you mirror? Do you say do you do the
I don't
opposite?
mirror yet.
Okay.
There are two things I want to do. I want to mirror, and I want to walk around more instead of doing it with them. So I'm moving towards that, but those are just a couple other goals. Like right now, I'm just happy to get through class, and everybody's like, "That was great," you know. And you know, so for now, you know. But so what is it about yoga you think? Why do you feel like it's your calling?
I have never. Well, first of all, I think that it's possible for people to have more than one calling. I just had this conversation with a student the other day, and I think it was the calling that was right for me at this point in my life. My personal practice came to me at a time that I needed yoga, and I didn't even know that I needed it. And it was at the end of a 25-year-long relationship. And I had been practicing yoga and going to yoga teacher training and trying to figure out how I was going to live life. Within a year, I transitioned to living 4 people in my house, to living alone in my house. And just had to really figure out basically how I was going to move forward. And when I started teaching, what I realized really quickly is if I'm tuned into what my students need and I'm present for them, then I'm not in my head.
Yeah.
And so teaching became just an oasis, a place to step away and be in community with other people and not necessarily worry about all the day-to-day details of things that, you know, really seemed incomprehensible because it wasn't anything that I ever imagined would happen in my life. And then when I started to, you know, think about what I was experiencing from a yogic perspective, it's like, of course, we don't have control. We have ideas about where we think our lives are going to go, and they might for a while, and then they might veer off. And so it gave me that space to really start to apply what I had learned in yoga in my own life. And as teachers, we say it all the time, the lessons, the things, the skills that we're talking about on your mat. It's not the asana, it's about how you carry it off the mat and into the world. And that's what it became for me. And so the fact that I could perhaps make a living doing it seemed like such a blessing because it is my joy. On Thursdays, I will often teach between 6 and 8 classes a day in Thursday. And those days, my heart is happy. My body is exhausted, but it just fills my soul so much to be able to hold space for people. And so, yeah, that's why I think it's my calling. And some days I feel like I'm acing it. I'm like, this is great. And other days I'm like, I think we just missed the whole left side, and I don't know why we did those 6 things. And, you know, just like in any job.
Does it matter?
You know, I mean, theoretically, I'd like people to be somewhat balanced when they leave. But no, that's the answer, is it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's, it was a gift that was given to me, and I hope that I can reflect that back out to students who are ready to receive that.
Yeah. You mentioned community. That word has come back to me a lot lately, and there's just something about finding your community, you know, whether it be through yoga, like us, you know, or other ways. It just seems so important as a human being to have community.
well, and one of your questions was, what does it mean to be human? And I thought about it, and I could have given the snarky answer of opposable thumbs, and what have you, and where spine is shaped. But the reality is that I think, while there are certain species of animals that act in community ways, they act, elephants are a prime example. I think that what we have as Homo sapiens is a really unique need to be in community. Our infants require that attachment with parents and or with other caregivers. We don't, give birth and gallop off and
Well,
hope that
exactly.
everything's,
Like a baby is just pretty much helpless for years.
Yes. And so I think that just in our inherent nature, we need to be in community. For some people like me, that means people all around me all the time is awesome. But for other people, it can be, knowing that there's somebody out there that you maybe see once a week. And I think that it is the rare exception to the rule that there's somebody who doesn't ever need another human being. And community, we find our community, but we find multiple communities. The people that we grow up with in our formative years, and then as young adults when we go off to college, we have that community, and there's some carryover through that. But I have a community of people that I love and care about at my church, and I have a community at Yes Yoga, and I have colleagues throughout the Twin Cities, and then I have the community of my students, and they're all interwoven in certain ways. But I think it's so essential because there are so many unknowns in life, and because we will have these times where we can't do all the lifting on our own. So I think it's a huge gift that we get from yoga, and Lucia invoked the term third space. People are looking for their third space, and Yes is unique in my experience.
Wait, back up a second. Tell me about this third space.
Okay, so we have home.
Yes.
And we have work. And in the past, in the 50s and 60s, most family units had church. And when you're a child, you have school and you have home, and maybe you had this other third space. And as we've moved away from some of those more faith-based community centers, we have work, and for some of us that means working at home in front of a computer and not seeing another human being. And we have family, but family is no longer we're all living on the same farm or right down the road from each other. Family is scattered all over the world, and we've moved away from the tradition of, say, a church. And so people are seeking that third space where they can find people who they connect with. And I see it happen before and after class at Yes all the time. The conversations that start, somebody who notices that you're wearing a Lawrence t-shirt and I'm a Lawrence alum, and we know these people in common, or we just start connecting around our love of yoga, and we end up sitting on a porch drinking a drink.
Yes, exactly. Well, I love how the studio, like, people walk in and people just immediately start chatting and talking, and it's almost kind of like I can see that for some like super like zen like yoga people that are used to really being quiet, like they'll walk in and go, who are these people? They're crazy. Why is it so loud in here? Why is everybody talking to each other? When are we gonna do yoga?
So question. Ask me a question.
Oh yes. Okay. So describe that again. When the first time you were in Shavasana, what was the feeling? Like, why did it speak to you?
Well, I'm laying there in a room full of relative strangers, and all of a sudden I felt like this wet stuff coming out of the corners of my eyes, and I was like, what is that all about? For somebody who really tried hard to keep things in control, I really had no comprehension because I wasn't feeling sad. There wasn't anything that I could identify about what that was, and it felt a little bit otherworldly in terms of I just went through this physical process that landed me here. And right before Shavasana started, I had spent 90 minutes doing all this ridiculousness with a teacher pushing on my back to try and get me into pigeon, and she couldn't figure out what to do with me, and was wondering why the fuck I was even there. And then she said, and now we're going to do Shavasana. And I was like, good God, what next? Because I didn't know what Shavasana was. And then I was like, oh, I can do this.
Yeah.
And I probably had just enough physical movement that I was able to really drop in a way that allowed me to release without even making the connections about what those things were. Probably wasn't until a year later that I realized that was the moment that something flipped for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I continued my practice and didn't have that experience again for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I liked the way it felt enough that it made me go back.
Mm-hmm.
And going back made me realize that it was really hard to find teachers in the Twin Cities who could help somebody who was in my early 40s, super inflexible, in a round, chubby body that, just doesn't fold and bend necessarily like other people who show up on the yoga mat. And the realization that perhaps I should do more of the work around my practice than lean into a teacher came when I was working my way into headstand, because while I am curvy, I'm kind of ridiculously strong. And so I was working into headstand and I was upside down in tripod, and because I was upside down, my breasts were covering my mouth and my nose, and so I said to the teacher, I can't breathe. And the teacher, very yogic, said, don't let your mind tell you negative images about your body. And I said, I actually can't breathe.
Wow.
Because there's no oxygen. And she said, oh, well, you should take child's pose then. Because that was what she knew to do to change the situation.
Yeah.
And most yoga teacher trainings, you've got so much information that's being delivered that teachers aren't taught to modify. And that was the moment where I was like, I want to do headstand. I don't want to do, I do want to do child's, but I want to be able to figure this out. And so that set me on the journey to find teachers who could help me, and then realize that in the Twin Cities at that point, there weren't a lot of teachers who were skilled in that.
Do you think that there are a lot of people out there that don't practice yoga because of that kind of
Yes.
oh, it's just this kind of like long, skinny, limberly.
I absolutely do. I know it. I have people who say to me, oh, I could never practice yoga. I'm not flexible.
But they can.
But they yes. yes. And I would say, you would never say, oh, I can't go to piano lessons. I don't know how to play piano. That's why you go to piano lessons. and so letting people know that, yes, not only can they, it can bring all this host of other goodness that you and I both appreciate about yoga.
Yeah.
But the other thing is when you don't see yourself reflected in the images around yoga, it doesn't feel like it's a space for you.
Mm.
And so it is not just about being in curvy bodies. That was my issue, but I hit all sorts of other demographics that I see, my peers doing yoga all the time. But we need more diversity, and we need more acceptance about differing abilities. And I think that since my first experience 10 years ago, yoga in the Twin Cities, and I hope across the country, has started to shift and change to be more aware about it. But if that's not your lived experience in your body, how do you know?
Right.
And so you have to have somebody tell you that. And when you only have 200 or 230 hours in teacher training, how do you make space for all of that information?
Oh no, I remember it being very overwhelming. I'm just sort of writing stuff down. I would get out of class and we wouldn't even really do many poses. We'd be there for getting all this information. I'm like, how is it possible to get all this information? I mean, to me, yoga was just this, this little thing, and then I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was the gift of the limitations that I encountered that made me go down the path to become a yoga teacher.
Yeah.
And then gave me a new life's work at a point where I needed to make that decision. I was not needed. I was able to make that decision.
Right.
I was allowed the space to create that.
Right.
So I think of all of it as huge gifts. I called my ex-husband at a certain point a couple of years ago, and I said, it was contentious when he moved up. Divorce is. And I said, I realize now how hard that was for you to say that you were going to go, to break hearts and, have all of that sadness. But I also have to thank you, because if you hadn't done that, if it had been so shitty, so hard, so sad, I wouldn't be where I'm at right now.
Well, yes, no, you are speaking to someone who totally gets that no, absolutely. I mean, life has thrown stuff at me, and my life has taken different, paths, and here we are.
Yeah.
And
the thing that I will have to tell you, my ex-husband said, "Jesus Christ, Elisabeth, do you have to call and talk about all of this stuff?" And I was like, "Yeah, I kind of do." So, but the reality is, everybody's life has those unexpected things, big, small, in between.
Yeah.
And a yoga practice hopefully can follow you on those journeys and give you hopefully some insights to help navigate. Even if it's just laying on your mat crying, which I did a lot of that.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
Not usually when I'm teaching.
So I imagine yoga is something which connects you with life, with the universe, or like. So, for me, a main thing that I'm interested in is how people connect to the universe, their connections. So yoga is probably one for you, correct?
Yeah.
Are there other things that you practice? You mentioned you go to church. I mean, are there other...
I don't go to church so much anymore. Some of the things that I really enjoyed about church, well, the reason I don't physically go on Sunday mornings is because I'm teaching yoga. But church for me was a lot of the ritual, the songs, and the community. And while I'm still connected with that community, that fellowship of friends, we connect in different places and in different ways. And logistically, because I'm busy on Sunday mornings, and because some of that I found in other places. But when I land back at church, those times that are a little bit few and far between right now, there is that same sense of balm for my soul. That comfort of sitting down and hearing the music and smelling the smells and seeing the people and using those words, that adds a layer of comfort.
Yeah.
And I had just mentioned that I had a friend who recently died, and at his funeral I realized what a gift that is to be able to sit shoulder to shoulder with a room full of people who all loved this same person.
What was it like for you, to lose this person, or for them to die?
I was with him. I was doing hospice care with him. And it was, again, another opportunity to live my yoga because he had been on this journey for 5 years. And we knew at a certain point, well, we're all going to die, but we knew at a certain point that he was going to die sooner than his biological age really reflected. And so when his cancer came back and treatment wasn't working this past winter and he shifted into hospice care, it was at the same time that I had a planned trip to Bali. And I had to decide if I was going to stay or if I was going to go. And of course I was given the gift of his blessing to go to live life. And I left not knowing if he would be alive when I got back. And I had to say, I have no idea what's going to happen. And I have to trust that this is where my heart is calling me to be in Bali right now, to be with these friends and to take this trip, knowing that I would be missing out potentially on something that was really, really important to me. And I had a dear friend who said, but Elisabeth, when you step away, that will create space for somebody else to step in who wouldn't be able to if you were still there. And so your leaving gives other people the opportunity to be helpful. And so it isn't selfish that you're leaving. It's selfless that you can give this to other people. And those were the right words at the right time. And I went to Bali, and when I came home, he was thankfully still alive and still lucid. And so we had a few more weeks together. And it was sitting with him in his last days. We did 24/7 care for about a week and a half before he died. And so rotating every third night, sleeping on the couch, you know, and watching him in his last moments, I realized there's no control. There's absolutely no control. And what I did was what I do for a living is I held space. And I actually didn't talk much, which is surprising for me. And some of the dearest hours were those hours in the middle of the night. And when he did die, I was with him, and I went to wake his wife up which I will say was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, because I had to tell her, you need to get up now, because your life is changed in ways that you can't imagine. And so she was with him, and I tucked them into bed together. And I went to the refrigerator and I grabbed a beer and I gave them space. And I realized really, really clearly that while Tim's human body was gone, his presence was there, probably for 2 or 3 days. You could still feel him in that space. And so some of those bigger questions about the meaning of life and all of these different experiences really were answered for me in a palpable way, because I felt that process and what happened, and I witnessed and knew what I knew, and in just a really different sense than sitting in a funeral home with an urn or a casket, knowing that Tim's body was no longer alive, but that his spirit stayed close for a while, was really compelling.
For some reason, like what you just said, it makes me think, like, do you think that the meaning of life can be found in death?
I think that there are 2 certainties in life, and it's birth and death.
Right.
And I actually think that everybody defines their own meaning in life, and I think that evolves and changes just like we do. I think that we are really, really complex, and we are so much more than the skin suit that we walk around in. And I don't know what Tim's experience was, of course, because he was dead. But it does make me curious.
Do you ever wonder, like, what it is to be dead?
I do. I absolutely do. I don't know that I will know that answer until that's my lived experience. And lived experience?
Death and life. Hold on. We're still rolling here. Yes, we are. Okay, good.
So, in terms of the meaning of life, I think that as humans, we want to have those answers. And I think that we all look for them and find them in different ways, like I say, that are evolving and changing. There isn't one meaning to life.
Well,
you can disagree.
No. I agree with what you're saying, but part of me thinks that, like, we approach life knowing we're gonna die. And
we forget that. We put that veil.
I know.
So
yeah. No, I agree. But you know, it's like if you could base your life on, at any moment I'm going to be dead, I could die. You know, it's like
what would you do differently?
What would you do differently? Would you just be like? I think everybody'd be like nuts. But
I would never clean my cat box. I mean, why would you? But I think that it's not realistic, you know. But I think those reminders that we find in Shavasana, that we're in corpse pose, it's our mini death. It's our opportunity to hold that space, and that's the hippy dippy stuff of yoga that I love. I don't necessarily invoke that in my teaching style, but that's where my heart is, that we get to come back to that stillness, come back to that rest, come back to life in the city.
Yes, we have motorcycles here.
Come back to life in the city with all manner of distractions.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, especially as Americans, we do not want to die. We don't want to get older. We don't want stuff to sag. I have students who are in their 80s who say, "Oh, I have arthritis. I'm so frustrated." I'm like, "You've lived on the planet against gravity, using your hands, you know, for decades."
Yeah.
It's what happens, but we fight that. We resist it. And we resist it.
Is it wrong to fight it, to resist it?
I would not give that a judgment. I mean, it's not wrong. I think the thing that I struggle with, because I teach body positive yoga, is that when we get trapped in this ideal that I have to look a certain way or feel a certain way, and that youth has more value than wisdom, that's how I view age, then especially when we start throwing billions of dollars down the drain to try and change the outside shape of our body, or to appeal to a certain, you know, way that we feel like we need to look. I mean, I color my hair. I have some vanity. I'm 51 years old, and so I understand it, but I also don't want people to get stuck in that, because when we can step outside of it, there's so much more to life than the stuff that we have, the clothes that we wear, the way that we look. Standing with your feet in the grass and being outside in nature and being in community with friends and all of those things, that is what matters to me.
Yeah.
And part of that, being in community and being in relationship, means that we hold people in good times, and it means we hold them when they're dying. And we hold them when they're crabby and boring, or we step away for a moment and we step back in. And I think that I have a lot of different ideas around death and dying in our country that have been formed recently, because this is the point of life. I don't know if this has been your experience, but friends' parents are dying, friends are dying. We're hitting this age where that's more of the reality, when 25 years ago everybody was having babies and buying houses. And so I'm thinking about death in different ways than I did before, and I think that we can celebrate and embrace it and make it more of a choice than we have in the past. So that might be my new cause. But
I like it. I
So.
like it. Have you?
This is a nice transition.
Have you ever felt moments of of transcendence?
Absolutely.
So transcendence,
Out of body experience.
yeah.
I have.
Like what?
I was just exactly as you would think. It happened when I was young. I was probably 13 or 14 years old. And sometimes when you wake up in the morning, you're like, was that a dream or was that real? I wasn't asleep, but I had the feeling that after the fact, I questioned, because nobody talks about this stuff, right? And in this experience and in this moment, that no psychotropic drugs, nothing. I mean, I was young enough that wasn't a part of my life. I was in my teenage girl bedroom that had cat wallpaper on the walls.
Right.
And I felt myself move out of my body and look down and see my body. In Yoga Nidra, sometimes you're instructed to look down and see yourself on the floor. And at a certain point, I realized that was what was happening. And I was a little freaked out. But also probably young enough to just be open to the whatever. And I moved past my bedroom and spent a period of time out of my body and in the world. Whether it was a minute or 8 hours, I have no idea. But I know that those dreams that seem real, you tend to forget about them a day later. That memory, that feeling, that sensation has stayed with me, including returning back to my body. And it has been something that I didn't choose. I hadn't thought about it. It wasn't part of my little Lutheran life in Owatonna, Minnesota. I mean, it was so bizarre that I held that inside me, and I didn't ever really talk about it, and I didn't really think about it much. Every once in a while, it would come up, in late night college conversations, and people would either roll their eyes or nod their heads knowingly or seemingly knowingly. And when I started practicing yoga and I started to find those moments of stillness in Shavasana and then hear the words that are spoken in Yoga Nidra, I realized that was what had happened. That I was truly an out-of-body experience, that my soul left my body for a period of time. And I know that it is possible. I don't know how to come back to it. I don't know how to recreate that. I don't know if it's luck or happenence.
Well, I'm not sure we would want everybody in the world just, floating
around
above
outside
their bodies and stuff like that.
laying there like some sort of apocalyptic. Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, because that word dream, when you first started talking about it, it always seems like transcendence. It always seems like this dream state because it's not what we're used to. It's not this reality.
And it's hard to give words to an experience that's so, it's so unique to anything that, we can talk about cold ground or soft grass or those sensations that we have in common. But that soul leaving the body experience, not so much. And I don't, for a certain period of time, I tried to give it some meaning. what is this? You know, is this some enlightenment? Is this something? And I actually think what it was just an experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it might become clear to me at some point in this life why that happened, why I've remembered that, why I carry that with me. But I might not get that answer in this lifetime, and that's okay.
Speaking of meaning, why do we do what we do? Like, as human beings, like, why do we get up in the morning and have our cup of coffee and go to work and then come home and we're like, why are we doing any of this?
Well, we live in Minnesota, and it gets really cold here, and if we can't buy clothes, we're in trouble. I mean, I think that we do require a certain amount of structure, and we don't have time to talk about capitalism and what I think is wrong with capitalism, but that's the system that we were born into.
Yeah.
And so, at least for now, that's what we're dealing with. And I think that...
But how do you find meaning in all of it? How do you, like, I'm going to my job and, you know, I've got to feed my family.
Right. I think you find meaning in it with connection, you know? And I think those connections can happen in small ways. I actually think more often it's the minuscule connections, the eye contact with people, the smile to somebody as you walk down the street. There's not a lot of times where you're present at a birth or you're present at a death. Those are the exceptions, and those are the ones that feel weighty and meaningful. But for most of us, that isn't our day-to-day experience. And so I think you can find meaning in all manner of different things. I used to cook. Well, I still do because I eat. But I used to cook for people, for large groups of people, and there was a huge joy in being able to serve a meal that would make people feel good. And one of the things I did when I was catering is I would ask, what did your grandma make? What are those foods? You know, it's not what's trendy. You know, it's not the Asian fusion, whatever, you know, funky thing. That wasn't the stuff I wanted to make. I wanted to cook spanakopita. You know, I wanted the food that brought back that feeling of comfort for people. And I think that you can find meaning in sharing meals together and in creating meals together.
Oh, I love you know, cooking food, preparing food, cooking food, having friends over, popping a bottle of wine, and just sitting there. I used to live in France, and we would do this several times a week. You would spend hours
at the table.
and it's just there's something about that just makes. And you're just in the moment, and you're talking, and you're communicating, and you're philosophizing, and you're eating. You're doing those primal kind of things, having a drink, and it's just. When I think about it, that right there, it almost makes me feel one with the universe. Just that feeling of that shared communal dinner.
Well, and even certain
experience.
flavors. When you're standing at the stove and you put a taste of something in your mouth, have you ever closed your eyes and just, you know? I mean, sometimes it's that, and sometimes it's, you know. but it's that creativeness about being able to, you know, throw things in a pot and take this pile of stuff and make it into this that then draws out that communal feeling, that connection. And so it doesn't have to be the big earth-shattering stuff. And I think if we think what gives our life meaning are the big things, we'll miss seeing all of the little things.
Quote that.
We could put it on a t-shirt or get a tattoo. Pretty sure somebody else already said it. Mother Teresa, who I didn't agree with on many of her beliefs, but said we can do no great things, only small things with great love. And I think if that's how we approach our day, you know, with intention, to give that love in little ways, it comes back to us tenfold.
So I always ask everybody what their superpower is.
So I saw that question, and I have two that I can think of,
Well,
maybe
good.
three. One of them is, our friend Lizanne knows this, I make really ugly smoothies. It doesn't matter. I put all the ingredients in, I hit go, they taste great, and they look terrible. I make ugly smoothies consistently.
But they taste great.
Are they
good? Are they good for you?
I don't worry about that. I totally don't worry about that.
Oh.
So I make ugly smoothies. I have a really loud woo. So if you ever...
have a loud what?
I'm not going to do it because I want to break your microphone, but you go to a concert or you're at a game and somebody's standing behind you.
Woo. Yeah.
I have an incredibly loud woo. So I think of that as one of my superpowers. People will never lose me in a crowd because I just need to, you know.
Yeah.
And I also have just an ability to talk incessantly. I don't have to come up for air. I rarely even think. One of the first yoga class series I taught was an 8-week series, intro to Curvy Yoga. And because it was the first class I taught, I made my sisters take it. I made them pay, and then I made them show up so that I had people in my class. And it was 8 one-hour classes. And at the end of the series, one of the women who didn't know me said, I just don't know how you can sit there and talk for almost a whole hour. And my sister Missy from the back of the room said, Jesus Christ, she's been talking nonstop for 46 years. So for me, stillness is a practice.
Well, I'm almost afraid to ask you if you meditate.
I do. We've talked about this before. I do really well with guided meditation.
Oh, yeah.
I love Yoga Nidra. I find that having that guide helps get me into that state. I've done other forms of guided meditation, and I've gotten better about sitting and doing, say, a counted meditation with my breath. But I have a lot of energy, and I don't sit still very well. Mm-hmm. And it's probably on the video that my toes have been moving kind of the whole entire time.
I've been kind of like,
so,
I move around a bit too.
So stillness is hard. Walking meditation alone in the woods for me is a really beautiful place to be. Laying in water, I can be so still when my body is in water. But yeah, meditation is a little bit more challenging. I bought a cushion. We'll see how that helps.
Well, I've found that when I do Tai Chi, that I'm more in the moment than like when I just sit there and like actively. But I try and meditate and just go for the stillness thing. Whereas if I'm flowing, I feel like I don't completely, but I lose myself and I'm just there, and it's just sitting doing nothing meditation. It's not for everybody.
No. I also knit, which I'm terrible at it, and I don't knit for the finished product. Someday I'll give you a dishcloth. It's the only thing I knit, but that repetitiveness of moving needles and yarn is really meditative for me, and I find that keeps my hands busy and takes enough of my attention that I need to be present. So I really do. I can't say I enjoy knitting, but I have incorporated that in a way that's really is really nice.
I think Sarah knits.
Sarah knits, yes, and Marnie knits.
Yeah.
A number. I don't know if I can generalize and say a number of yoga teachers knit. A number of yoga teachers knit. They knit beautiful things. I knit dishcloths that look like crap, but wash dishes. Because, like I say, for me, it's not creating the sweater. It's the process.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll knit and then I'll just pull it all out and I'll knit again.
Yeah.
So like the sand mandalas, where you get that in and then you blow it away.
I want to get a little more ice, then I want to ask you about your
bourbon, I'm guessing.
Yes. And no.
Do you like music?
Music is it's a huge component of my life. No shameless promotion for that bourbon, okay? But
you should be sponsored.
But we will promote Rock the Car. Yeah. Yes, I
Curvy yoga.
absolutely,
You love music.
I absolutely love music, and for me, music is transcendent. Music is connection. You know, a little bit like when we were talking about food. You know, there's really something there about music, and I know that when I go, not every show, but sometimes when I'm at a show and I'm up front and I'm watching just some great musician. I mean, yeah, that's where I've had the most transcendent experiences in my life. Just watching. I went to see Steve Winwood from Traffic. I was up front, and he had like the best musicians in the world, and I just was there for like 2 hours, and I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe I was living it. And then I saw Leonard Cohen, same thing, and I've seen, just different concerts. That's where I guess I've never actually thought about it, because I never asked myself these questions, like where do you find transcendence? But yeah, you know, music and those musical experiences, and playing music too. I like to play music, so sometimes when you're jamming and stuff like that, you just get this. Yeah, it's like meditation. So Curvy Yoga, tell me about your inspiration.
It isn't my inspiration.
Oh, okay.
So to give credit,
She stole it, okay.
To give credit where credit's due, I'm licensed trademark. I did my training with a woman named Anna Guest-Jelly, who is one of the people who was at the forefront of identifying the need to create a safe, inclusive, body-positive space for people to practice yoga. Which it sounds a little bit like the spiel, but that's really what she did through her experience of becoming a yoga teacher. And she took really the postures that we use most of the time as teachers and modified them everywhere from the ground up. So doing tree pose laying on your back on the ground, to doing tree pose seated, to doing tree pose against the wall, to doing tree pose standing with your toes supported, all of these different variations for really most of the yoga poses you practice. And so my training was with her. When I decided that I needed to figure out how to help myself in my yoga practice so that I could advance my practice, I found Curvy Yoga online, and I was like, great, they've got a zip code search database. So I typed in 55407 and 25-mile radius, and nobody came up. And so I put in the 50-mile radius, and nobody came up. And then I put in the 100-mile radius, and I was like, who's going to drive 100 miles for yoga? And so I signed up for her email list, and it went to the back of my mind. And then I received an email from her the year my oldest daughter was going off to college saying, sign up for yoga teacher training. And something clicked, and I was like, I can't teach yoga. I can't touch my toes. I mean, like, how could I be a yoga teacher? But I filled out the express interest form and had a phone conversation with her, and within months, this will harken back to your love of music, I was traveling to Nashville, Tennessee to do my yoga teacher training, which was an experience in and of itself because of the food in Nashville, the music in Nashville, and yoga teacher training meant that I really never wanted to come home because I had such an amazing experience in Nashville. And I went thinking I was doing it to help my own personal practice because I didn't need to teach. I didn't need to have a job. And so I did my yoga teacher training, and I came back, and that changed. And so that's when I started teaching. But she really was the brainchild behind the fact that we need different images in yoga. And since that time, other people, both in the Twin Cities and around the country and in Canada, Diane Bondi, Amber Carnes, there's a whole subset of people who have started doing the similar kinds of adaptive trainings to help figure out how to modify, just how to step your foot wide to make a little more space, or to slide your belly to the inside of your thigh so you have a little more space to fold in a little deeper. It sounds wrong to say it's not rocket science, but it is really just how to maneuver in your body to create these shapes, to find a flow or a hatha practice that you feel strong and supported in, whatever that looks like.
Well, what has been the response of people that like you teach in class?
What you maybe have noticed is that I teach to people in all different body sizes. We can create the space and invite people, but we can't drag them in off the street, right? And so I think we continue to make the invitation and be really intentional about our welcome, so that isn't just words. When people write class descriptions all the time, they say everyone is welcome, but if they don't know how to help somebody modify, that's actually not true. And so just really living that work.
Yeah.
And by bringing it to the Yes Yoga teacher trainees, even in a little bit, to say these are some things you should think about when somebody comes to your class.
Yeah.
You know, it takes some people longer to transition up and down off the floor, regardless of the outside shape of their body.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we create space for that to happen
Mm-hmm.
in a class where we have an expectation of what it might move and flow like?
Mm-hmm.
So my classes aren't limited to curvy classes at all anymore. And the thing that probably informed me the most from my training was that it was trauma informed, which means that I don't walk around the classroom and I don't touch people, and I let people use their own sense of what they need to explore, and I give suggestions. You might do this or you might do that. And sometimes when I'm working one-on-one with private students, I might be a little more directive about put this block under your hand and see how it feels.
Yeah.
But rather than me telling you, this is what you should do and this is where you should feel it, I get to create the container where you get to figure that out. So I teach a lot of slow flow. Slow flow is kind of my jam because it gives space for those things to happen. I love teaching slow flow. I teach yin and restorative occasionally. It's really hard for me to be quiet that long. I have to kind of sit on my hands and not say anything in restorative. But I teach gentle and
Just
share.
count to 100.
That's right.
In your head.
That's probably as close as I get to meditating when I have students in restorative yoga. But all of the things I learned in my teacher training can translate into all of these other different styles, and so.
Well, I like the fact that you're, like, you know, we were talking about getting together and everything. Initially we were talking about just having a beer or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden we're doing this and having some drinks. But yeah, I like that about you. You are, I don't know how to describe it. You're different.
Oh, I've been told that before.
No, but
I think the thing is that we make certain assumptions, and I don't say that in a negative way.
Yeah.
But about the style that I teach in, I don't use Sanskrit. I don't do a lot of the hippy dippy stuff because I'm trying to welcome people who might be just waiting their toe in. And so, what I live.
But you also speak your mind.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yes.
You say
No,
you believe in feeling. Say that again.
But I believe in all of the hippy dippy yoga philosophy.
Yeah.
But so what you maybe have seen represented in my teaching
Yeah.
doesn't reflect that other half of my life,
Yeah.
which really informs who I am and why I teach.
Mm-hmm.
And because I don't, I guess I'm wearing yoga pants right now, but I don't drive, an electric car or ride my bike to the studio or have a macrame water bottle or have tattoos of lotus on my arms.
Keep going.
Like I
This is
don't
great.
have all of the trappings that people think a yoga teacher might have. And so...
But that's what I found so appealing. I mean, it's like, yes, this is... Yeah.
Every once in a while, I think I should get I would like to get a tattoo. I just haven't settled on what it is.
I was just talking to somebody yesterday, and I actually, in my mind, I started thinking, like, am I really talking about seriously getting a tattoo, even though I've never gotten one? And I don't know, it's like one of those things, it's like never say never,
Right,
but
never say never.
never say never. And then I started showing her the tattoo I was thinking of getting, she's like, what? Are you crazy? And I'm like, okay, so much for that idea, but yeah, I guess I won't get that.
The sleeve.
Yes, it's basically the sleeve down to here, right?
Uh-huh.
And I was showing.
It's a time commitment.
It was one of my colleagues, and I showed her, and I was like, do you know who the Maori are from New Zealand? She's like, no. And I'm like, well, check this out. So I bring up Maori tattoos, and they have the most insanely intricate, beautiful, like, tattoos. And so I kind of, in the back of my mind, sometimes I think about it, but I don't know. I don't know that I ever will, Yeah, it is a time commitment.
It is a time commitment to get that amount of tattoo. And the thing that I know is that the things I've been most definite about in my life, I've changed my mind on. And so to commit to a tattoo, I would be ideally making a commitment for the rest of my life. So it would probably be Opus the penguin or Bill the cat. I mean, like that's like
I love that. I love that.
because I can commit to those guys.
That's awesome.
But I was, like I said, 11 years ago, if you would have said I was teaching yoga, much less practicing, I would have laughed.
Right.
I didn't know what I didn't know. And so, yeah.
Is there anything you tell your 20-year-old self?
Oh, how many hours of battery do you have? Actually, probably not, because I don't have a lot of regrets.
Right.
The reason I'm here living this life is because of every decision that I made up until now. And some of them cause people pain, and those are the ones that I regret. But but because it caused pain, not because of where it landed me, if that makes sense.
Right.
And so to go back in time, because I was married young and then got divorced, people are like, oh, maybe you shouldn't have. But I had a 25-year relationship that resulted in a beautiful family. I wouldn't say don't do that.
I have 2 grown children that I would not have if I hadn't
Right.
been with, someone, we got divorced, but they are fantastic.
Right. And it is the lotus flower with the muck beneath it, right? You get the beauty and the darkness that
Ooh, I like that. The lotus, okay, yeah.
that you wouldn't have. And so if I were to, movie style, go back in time and tell myself something, would that change the trajectory?
All right, how about this? What would you tell a 20-year-old person today?
Start investing in your retirement fund now if you want to be a yoga teacher.
I love it. I love
just
it.
from a really practical standpoint, this is the world that we live in.
Yeah, I've had these things too where I'm like, okay, if I was to talk to a 20-year-old, be like, okay, you want to make sure that you put lotion on your skin.
Right.
These basic things.
Right.
Don't forget that, okay?
Right. I think that, because I get to teach to teachers, and often yoga teacher trainees are young, I think that, telling people to take time to breathe, to live through the hard stuff and let stuff go. And I think that those kinds of things, we try and impart on other people because maybe we wish we had that piece of insight before, but everybody has to find their own way. And so, and I don't, and I make jokes about the retirement fund, but the reality is find a way to do what you love, however you do that. And if that means working a job that pays the bills so you can teach a couple of classes a week, that's great. If it means teaching 28 classes a week, the day I taught the most classes ever, I taught 10 classes in a day. And in Shavasana, my feet started cramping. And I thought, well, now I've learned my limit. I can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Pushing those boundaries so that you can figure out what it is and then stepping back from it.
Well, but isn't that basically the definition of your 20s, pushing boundaries?
Yeah. Well, to be fair.
And going like, oh, shit.
To be fair, I was married, and by the time I was 23, living in this house. Yeah. And so I don't know that I did as much of that as other 20-year-olds did. And to the people who don't do the boundary pushing, who follow the path because of the shoulds that they have in their lives, I would say, listen here. Don't listen out there. Pinterest is an interesting, lovely, evil place where people can save recipes and ideas for building a future yoga studio and share that information, but also it can be that suck of I need to have this and I need to have that, those outside trappings. And so if we could get all of everyone, but starting at a really young age, to really start to listen to their heart and to listen to their gut.
So what makes you this is a 2-part question.
Okay.
First part is, what makes you happy?
Oh, so it's going to sound corny. I am a ridiculously Pollyanna person.
Okay.
I'm happy with a cup of coffee on my porch in the morning. I am happy when I'm outside.
Yeah.
When I'm in my hammock eating
Yeah.
tacos, or when I'm teaching yoga.
Tacos.
I'm happy with tacos. There's certainly things that make me unhappy. Traffic, technological woes. But even in those things, I'm kind of a ridiculously happy person.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure why. I'm not really questioning it too much because I'm going to just go with it.
So the second part of my question is, so you're telling me, for you, what makes you happy, but if you were to suggest to somebody, like, here's how you can find happiness, how would you, follow your bliss, or what, I mean, what would it be if you were talking to someone else, like, in order to be happy, see, I don't like these words, like, you should do this,
right.
You should do that, what is it?
I keep coming back to the listening to your heart, and...
Yeah, but I think that's too general for people. People go, what do you mean,
right.
listening to my heart? You know?
You start with the breath.
Yeah, start with your breath. Yeah.
I do that with people. I do it with my children who are adults, who are, they're wonderful human beings, but,
Yeah.
Pause, breathe. It isn't going to give you quick answers. And for some people, those are harder answers to find because we come to wherever we are in life with a history of life that has been, for me, really blessed. Really blessed.
Yeah.
And I have been given so many gifts and so much privilege in life. And so to imply that for somebody who's dealt with adversity or trauma or had historical trauma, to breathe and be and listen to your heart and be happy, that does sound like bullshit. Because there are layers of pain that go back perhaps generations that people need is another one of those words, that are part of people's experience.
Yeah.
And so happiness might not be the end goal. I'd love it if everybody was happy. It would be great. We'd be like, we're in a fucking Disney movie, right? With birds, tying bows around us. I don't know. But the reality is, I think for some people, getting up out of bed is an accomplishment.
Or just survival.
Yes, just survival. And so I think that I wouldn't want to assume that everyone can reach that same level of happiness, and maybe that happiness is, a shared cup of coffee that you have in a shelter, and maybe even that isn't enough. And I think we just get to continue to create spaces for people to have their experiences and accept whatever experiences those are.
I do like that whole idea of third space you were talking about in the beginning. It's just, yeah. Do you think people are kind of moving away from religion and seeking out more third space kind of place?
I don't know that they're intentionally seeking out third space, but I think statistically people are moving away from church because the church,
But statistically they're moving away, but why?
Well, unfortunately, historically, the church, big C, has done some really horrific things.
Right.
And so congregations that are doing good social justice work maybe don't have the same draw because they don't seem maybe as sexy. I don't know what church that is. Maybe not a sentence. You could scrap
Sexy
that.
church.
Sexy church. But, I think that there are, the little scrappy churches that are doing the hard work to feed people and clothe people and meet people where they're at. And they might not necessarily have the big marketing billboard, sound system, contemporary music that pulls people in. And so I think rightly so, there are generations of people who have grown up not going to church on a regular basis for whatever reason, who don't see the value in it because what they know is what they've heard, which is the church has done terrible things. And that doesn't mean every church, but it's enough to say, why would I choose to spend my time there?
Right. Okay. This term gets bandied about a lot, but do you find yourself to be spiritual. And when I think of that, like everybody's like, well, I'm not religious. I'm spiritual. Yeah, okay. God is, energy or whatever.
Right,
It's
right.
like,
Yeah, absolutely. Because I believe in a spirit and an energy, and it doesn't have to manifest itself in an old white guy with a beard wearing a bathrobe.
she said that like it's a bad thing. Where's my bathrobe? God, she just said old white guy with a beard.
And a bathrobe.
Okay,
I
never mind.
haven't seen the whole
The bourbon
look, so.
is kicking in.
So I mean, I don't think it's God with a capital G.
Yeah.
I don't think it is a Christian God, or I think that
Yeah.
being spiritual for me means acknowledging that there's something bigger than this.
What does that mean?
It means that I don't believe in coincidence. I mean, sure, there coincidences happen, but I don't believe that everything that happens is a coincidence.
Well, how about this whole thing where people say everything happens for a reason?
Mm-hmm.
Does it really?
I don't know. I mean, I think that it makes people feel good to believe that.
Yeah.
I think that some things happen in a way that is really great, the way it plays out. And I don't think that there's necessarily a puppet person,
Puppet master.
Puppet master. Now I've got that trio song in my head. So I don't necessarily think that it's that level of minutia, but I just think that there are enough coincidences that happen. I mean, we're on this big rock spinning around the sun, and the idea that a big bang happened, totally, I believe it happened, but that everything came together to create this level of intricacy.
Pretty amazing.
It's pretty amazing. I mean, I guess I don't know. I don't have that answer, but
Yeah.
for me personally, there is some peace in thinking that there is something bigger, and I think it is that acknowledging that we are more than our bodies,
Mm-hmm.
and that there is a part of us that lives on in a certain way. And whether
I
it
believe
means
that,
we're
absolutely.
reincarnate, when we come back in another life as that cat who gets to sleep in a basket, who clearly did something great in a different life,
Yeah.
although the basket's a little small. Or we're granted a fast pass to heaven or purgatory or wherever. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. It doesn't inform how I live my life, but I do think that there is something.
Yeah.
The story that I will share, it has to do with my friend's death, is that when I was on my trip to Bali, my next door neighbor Julie and I traveled there together, and we were on a yoga retreat. It was more of a spiritual retreat than it was asana, but we spent this time together where part of my heart was back in Minneapolis,
Yeah.
where Tim was dying, and Julie and I shared a room, and so we spent a lot of time together, more than usually adults we get to spend with friends. And we came back from the trip, and 3 weeks later, the night that Tim died, I was with him, and I was standing, and I had my hand over his heart and my hand on his back. And the next day, after he had died, I stayed at the house for a while, and then I came home to take a shower. And when I looked at my phone, my next door neighbor Julie said, I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I wanted to call you because I felt you, and I wanted to reach out and let you know that I was holding you. But I didn't want to interrupt because I knew that you were with Tim. She was here in her house and woke up as my friend was dying in my hands.
Mm-hmm.
And that's some kind of magic.
Yeah.
I don't know how that happens,
Yeah.
and yet it does. And it's not just that one incident. You hear people tell those stories all the time,
Yeah.
And so that's why I consider myself spiritual, even though I can't give a definition to what that is, only an example. I know. This is why we'd have these conversations over alcohol. Coffee would not be the same.
No, exactly. I really appreciate the fact that you sat down and talked to me about a lot of stuff, personal stuff too, and geez.
Well, and that's when I read your questions. I was like, oh my gosh, these are big questions.
Yeah.
But I actually think they're really good things to contemplate, because if we go through life and we are thinking about, well, I always think about when my next meal is, so that's not a good example.
Right.
But if our concern lands on what the stock market's doing all the time, and we don't have some of these bigger thoughts, that is my biggest fear, is that we get to the end of this journey, this one chance to live this life.
Yeah.
And then when it's too late, start to have those questions.
Right.
You know?
Right. No, I mean, for me, it's so important to ask these questions, and the reason I want to put it out there into the world on YouTube or whatever is because I think other people are, asking these questions too, and it's, maybe we're not going to find any answers, but having that conversation around the sun setting over there, over, just life, it's I think it's really important, and it's so easy to go through our lives just kind of like, you get to like you're 67 years old and you're like, oh, I didn't think about it. Well, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I think the thing is that having these conversations in a public forum means that it gives the validity for other people to say, yes, I resonate with that, or no, I don't. She sounds like she's full of shit. I actually, want to think about this a different way. And I think that, inviting the conversation is just the beginning.
Yes.
And then you can say to everybody in YouTube world, which is
YouTube
kind of the
world.
which is kind of the world, like, whether you have these conversations with yourself in a piece of paper or with a friend on a porch with an alcoholic beverage or a cup of tea, whether you have this big conversations or smaller ones, you get to start investigating those things, which then creates that self-reflection back into you, which starts helping you hopefully listen to your heart.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, it sounds super simplistic to say it that way, and life is far more complicated because we have to get up in the morning and check the boxes. But
like what we just did, I've been in a bar and I've like sat next to somebody and had a conversation for 5 minutes or even 2 minutes, and I just said a couple things, or they said something to me. It affects you, So if somehow in the conversations that I have with people, somebody like sees it and they don't even watch but 2 minutes of some interview, and it makes them go like, and then they're like talking to this person and they think different, it just
sparks something.
It's not like it's not like my purpose, but it's just like, I don't know. Once again, I'm at a loss for words. I do this most of the time when I'm talking to people. I'll just be like, okay, never mind.